The crystalline spires of Erdin pierced the amber sky of Athera like frozen flames. Beneath the twin suns, the life temple known as Soul of Light stood as the last bastion of the ancient ways, its translucent walls refracting the dying light of evening into countless rainbows that danced across the city streets. Within these sacred halls, a lone human warrior named Damien stood guard, his scarred hands resting uneasily on the hilt of his sword. Unlike the tall, elegant Atherans with their opalescent skin, Damien was a refugee from Earth, stocky, battle-worn, with eyes that had seen too much death. His memories were fragments of battlefields, the smell of plasma burns, and the screams of fallen comrades. The Holy Wars had claimed his homeworld 3 years ago, leaving him and other human survivors scattered across the galaxy, fighting as mercenaries for alien causes they barely understood. Now, in the era of Holy Wars, when Atheran temples fell one by one to the corrupting touch of the technology Avengers, known locally as the Destroyer cults, Damien found himself among the last defenders of a faith he did not share, on a world he had not chosen. Human, called High Priest Valan from the chamber entrance, his voice carrying the musical lilt of the Atheran tongue, even when speaking the common galactic language. The Council has selected you for the escort mission. The crystal relic must reach the main temple by sunrise. Damien turned, measuring the priest with a cautious gaze. Valan's translucent robes shimmered with embedded power lines, ley lines, the Atherans called them, thin channels of blue energy that marked his high status. "Why me?" Damien asked, his voice rough from disuse. Among the Atherans, humans were barely tolerated, useful for their combat skills, but distrusted for their primitive nature. Your own warriors would be more suitable. Valan's pearlescent eyes narrowed. The Destroyer cults are hunting our people by their energy signatures. You, being human, give off no such trace. You are conveniently invisible. Damien understood the unspoken truth. He was expendable. "What is this relic?" The High Priest produced a crystalline object, no larger than a child's fist. Within its faceted surface, light pulsed like a heartbeat. "The soul fragment," Valan said reverently. "It contains the essence of our sleeping goddess, Halai. For 3,000 years, she has slumbered within the heart of the main temple. This fragment was taken for annual blessing ceremonies. But now, with the destroyers advancing, it must be returned to strengthen the temple's defenses." Damien accepted the relic, surprised by its warmth against his palm. For a moment, just a flicker, he thought he felt something stir within it, like a distant consciousness brushing against his own. "I'll need a ship," he said, tucking the crystal into the specialized pouch on his combat vest. "Commander Thane has arranged transport. The pilot, Ketra, awaits you at the southern landing pad." Valan hesitated, then added with visible difficulty, "May the sleeping ones guide your path, human." It was the closest thing to a blessing Damien had received since arriving on Athera. The journey to the southern landing pad took Damien through the winding streets of Erdin. The city's crystalline architecture caught the last rays of the setting suns, transforming ordinary buildings into cathedrals of light. Few Atherans remained outside at this hour. The recent attacks had made everyone cautious. At the landing pad, Damien found a sleek vessel with curves that mimicked the city's organic architecture. Beside it stood Ketra, a female Atheran with military bearing and the distinctive metallic implants of a pilot guild member at her temples. "You're the human escort?" she asked, her tone neutral but her stance wary. Damien nodded once. "The sooner we leave, the better." "Agreed. The destroyers have increased aerial patrols near the outer districts. Our window for clean departure is narrowing." She gestured toward the ship's entrance. "The vessel is shielded against energy scans, but their visual systems will still detect us. We'll need to use the crystal canyons for cover." The ship's interior was sparse but efficient, designed for speed rather than comfort. As Ketra took her position at the controls, Damien secured himself in the co-pilot seat, the crystal relic a reassuring weight against his chest. "Why do they call them destroyer cults?" he asked, as the engines hummed to life, more to break the silence than from genuine curiosity. Ketra's hands danced across the control panel, her eyes fixed on the navigation display. They believe technology should replace the gods, not serve them. Their leader, a renegade priest named Morthus, discovered how to corrupt the ley lines, to drain their power and redirect it into weapon systems. The ship rose silently, banking toward the massive crystal formations that bordered the city's eastern edge. "That doesn't explain the religious fervor," Damien pressed. Ketra's expression darkened. "Morthus promises his followers transcendence, uploading consciousness into the ley line network, becoming one with what they call the true light, its perversion of our most sacred beliefs." As they soared through the narrow passages between towering crystal spires, Damien noticed the increasing tension in Ketra's posture. Her eyes flicked constantly between the scanners and the view outside. "We have company," she said suddenly, her voice tight. "Destroyer patrol, coming in from the northwest." Damien checked the tactical display. 3 ships, moving in a search pattern, not yet aware of their presence, but certain to detect them soon. "Can we outrun them?" "Not without revealing our position. The thrusters would leave an energy signature they could track for miles." Ketra guided their vessel deeper into the crystal labyrinth. "We need to hide until they pass." She directed the ship into a narrow crevice between 2 massive crystal formations, powering down all but the essential systems. Outside, the last light of day faded, plunging the canyon into shadows broken only by the faint blue glow of natural ley lines running through the crystal structures. "How long to the main temple?" Damien asked, his hand unconsciously moving to touch the relic. 3 hours, assuming we avoid further patrols." Ketra's voice dropped. "The temple has been under siege for weeks. Reinforcements arrive daily, but the destroyers gain ground with each attack." They sat in tense silence as the enemy patrol ships passed overhead, their searchlights sweeping across the crystal faces. When the danger had passed, Ketra reactivated the engines and continued their journey through the maze of crystal formations. As they emerged from the canyons onto a vast crystalline plain, the distant silhouette of the main temple came into view, a massive structure that dwarfed even the grandest buildings of Rodan, its central spire reaching impossibly high into the night sky. "It's beautiful," Damien whispered, surprising himself with the admission. Ketra's expression softened momentarily. "It houses the heart of our civilization, the convergence point of all major ley lines on Athera. When the sleeping ones still walked among us, they used this temple to channel energy throughout the planet, bringing life to barren regions and healing the sick." The moment of tranquility shattered as alarms blared through the cockpit. The tactical display lit up with dozens of incoming signatures. "Destroyer warships!" Ketra shouted, banking the vessel sharply to evade the first volley of energy blasts. "They found us, or the temple. Either way, we're flying into a full-scale assault." Ahead, the main temple was under heavy bombardment. Energy weapons scorched its crystalline surface, while ground forces advanced from multiple directions. Atheran defenders fought valiantly, but they were clearly outnumbered. "We need to land now," Damien said, securing his combat gear, "before they lock down the entire perimeter." Ketra nodded grimly, diving the ship toward a small landing platform on the temple's eastern face. "I'll create a diversion to draw their fire. Get the relic inside. It's our only hope." As they approached the landing platform, a massive explosion rocked the temple's central dome. Cracks spread across its surface like spiderwebs, and sections began to crumble. "They're targeting the main chamber," Ketra's voice rose in panic. "If they breach the goddess's sanctuary—" Her words cut short as a direct hit sent their vessel spinning. Warning lights flashed across the console as Ketra fought to regain control. "Brace for impact," she called, as they careened toward the landing platform. The ship crashed hard, skidding across the crystal surface before coming to rest against a temple wall. Damien was thrown from his seat, his head striking the bulkhead. Through the haze of pain, he saw Ketra slumped over the controls, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. "Ketra?" He reached for her, checking for a pulse. It was weak but steady. Outside, the battle raged. Enemy ships circled the temple like predators, their weapons tearing into the ancient structure. Destroyer ground troops advanced relentlessly, their corrupted ley line weapons leaving scorched paths across the crystalline landscape. Damien dragged Ketra from the damaged vessel, finding shelter behind a fallen column. After ensuring she was stable, he turned his attention to their surroundings. The eastern entrance to the temple stood 50 yards away, currently defended by a small group of Atheran warriors. The crystal relic pulsed against his chest, its rhythm increasing like a racing heartbeat. And then, so faint he almost dismissed it as imagination, Damien heard a voice calling from within the temple, not with sound, but directly into his mind. "Bring me home, warrior. The way is open to you." Damien hesitated, looking back at the unconscious Ketra. Leaving her felt wrong, but the relic's mission took precedence. He placed his sidearm within her reach and moved her deeper into cover. "I'll send help when I can," he promised, though she couldn't hear him. Drawing his primary weapon, Damien analyzed the battlefield with the cold efficiency of a veteran soldier. The destroyer forces were concentrated on the main entrance and the dome, leaving the eastern approach relatively unguarded. If he timed his run between bombardments, he might reach the entrance. The voice in his mind grew stronger as he prepared himself. "Now, warrior, run now." Damien sprinted from cover, zigzagging across the open ground as enemy fire erupted around him. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, searing through his armor, but adrenaline pushed him forward. The Atheran defenders, recognizing his approach, provided covering fire. As he reached the entrance, a massive explosion shook the temple. The ground beneath his feet cracked, and several defenders were thrown back by the force. Damien stumbled inside, just as sections of the entryway collapsed behind him, sealing off the entrance in a shower of crystal shards. In the sudden quiet of the temple interior, Damien caught his breath. The corridor before him was illuminated only by the blue glow of ley lines running through the walls. The air hummed with energy that made his skin prickle. "Follow the light. Come to me." The voice was clearer now, distinctly feminine but with an otherworldly resonance that echoed in his bones. Against all military training and survival instinct, Damien found himself compelled to obey. He moved deeper into the temple, following corridors where the ley lines glowed brightest. The sounds of battle outside grew muffled, then distant. Time seemed to stretch and compress strangely as he walked, as though the temple existed partially outside normal space. After what might have been minutes or hours, Damien emerged into a vast chamber. Unlike the angular architecture of the outer temple, this space was perfectly circular, its domed ceiling a masterpiece of crystal artistry that captured and amplified the light of the ley lines. At the center stood a raised dais with an empty pedestal. Damien approached cautiously, the relic at his chest pulsing in time with the ley lines that converged beneath the pedestal. The voice that had guided him fell silent, but he could feel anticipation building in the air around him. With reverent care, he removed the crystal from its pouch. It glowed brilliantly now, casting prismatic patterns across the chamber walls. Following instinct, Damien placed it upon the pedestal. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the crystal fragment melded with the pedestal, sinking into it as though returning to a larger whole. The ley lines throughout the chamber flared with blinding intensity, and a harmonic tone filled the air, rising in pitch until it bordered on painful. Damien shielded his eyes as the convergence point above the pedestal erupted in pure white light. When he could see again, a figure stood before him, a woman, but unlike any he had ever encountered. She was tall, even by Atheran standards, with skin like polished pearl that seemed to capture and reflect the light around her. Her hair floated weightlessly around her head, a cascade of silver strands that moved as though underwater. Her eyes, when they opened, were pools of luminous blue energy, the same energy that flowed through the ley lines. "Halai," Damien whispered, recognizing the goddess from temple iconography he had seen throughout Urdan. The goddess studied him with those impossible eyes. "You have brought me back to myself, warrior of earth," she said, her voice the same that had guided him through the temple. "After 3,000 years of fragmented sleep, I am whole again." Damien dropped to one knee, overwhelmed by her presence. "The temple is under attack. The destroyer cults." "I know." Halai moved from the pedestal, her feet hovering inches above the floor. Morthus and his followers seek to drain the ley lines and destroy what they cannot control. They fear what they do not understand. She approached Damien, reaching out to touch his wounded shoulder. At her touch, the pain vanished, the burned flesh knitting itself whole again. "Rise, Damien of Earth. You and I have much work to do if we are to save my people, and yours." Damien stood, noticing that the goddess knew his name, though he had never spoken it to her. "I don't understand. What can I do against their weapons?" Halai smiled, and it was like watching starlight ripple across water. "You are more than you appear. Damien, when you touched my essence in the crystal fragment, I sensed something extraordinary. Your bloodline carries traces of goddess-touched ancestry. Somewhere in your family's distant past, humans and beings like myself crossed paths." She gestured, and the air between them shimmered, revealing a three-dimensional map of glowing lines, the ley line network that spanned the entire planet. "This is what Morthus seeks to corrupt and control. The ley lines are not merely power sources. They are the living nervous system of Athera. Through them, I can feel every attack, every corruption, every death." Her expression darkened. "But my connection is still weak after so long in slumber. I need a conduit, someone who can walk between worlds as I once did." Damien stared at the map, mesmerized by its complexity. To his surprise, he could follow the patterns, sense the flow of energy, as though it were a tactical display. "You want me to fight for you," he said, understanding dawning. "With me," Halai corrected. "As equals in this battle. I have the power, but you have the warrior's mind and heart. Together, we can turn the tide." Before Damien could respond, the temple shuddered under another bombardment. Parts of the ceiling cracked, sending crystal shards raining down. "They've breached the outer defenses," Halai said, her eyes distant as she sensed through the ley lines. "We must act now." She extended her hand to Damien. After a moment's hesitation, he took it. Immediately, energy surged through him, not painful, but overwhelming in its intensity. His vision expanded, perception stretching beyond the physical. Suddenly, he could see the ley lines not just as glowing paths, but as rivers of information and power. Through this enhanced awareness, Damien could perceive the battle outside, as though watching from multiple vantage points simultaneously. He saw the destroyer ships, their corrupted technology draining energy from captured ley lines to power weapons of terrifying force. He saw Atheran defenders falling back, their numbers dwindling, and he saw Ketra, now conscious, leading a group of civilians toward a sheltered evacuation point. "I can sense their command ship," Damien said, focusing on a massive vessel hovering above the temple dome. "It's coordinating the attack patterns. If we could disrupt it—" "We can do more than disrupt," Halai replied. "Follow my lead." With her hand still clasping his, the goddess guided Damien through a side passage that opened into a smaller chamber. Here, a crystal column rose from floor to ceiling, pulsing with concentrated energy. This is an access point to the main ley line hub, Halai explained. I can channel power through it, but I need your tactical mind to direct it effectively. Damien studied the battlefield through his expanded awareness, formulating a strategy based on patterns he could now perceive in the enemy formations. Their ships are vulnerable when they're actively draining energy, he observed. There's a moment of instability before they convert the ley line power to their weapon systems. Halai nodded. Then that is when we strike. Place your hands on the column. Damien did as instructed. The crystal was warm beneath his palms, vibrating with potential energy. Halai positioned herself opposite him, her own hands meeting his through the transparent crystal. Focus on the enemy command ship, she instructed. Visualize its position, its vulnerabilities. I will follow your targeting. Closing his eyes, Damien concentrated on the massive destroyer vessel. In his mind's eye, he traced its outline, identifying weapon systems, propulsion arrays, and the central command module. Most importantly, he located the corrupted ley line collectors, dark, cancerous growths attached to the ship's underside. Now, he whispered, opening his eyes to find Halai watching him intently. The goddess began to glow, her form becoming almost translucent as energy poured from her into the crystal column. The ley lines throughout the temple brightened in response, power flowing inward from all directions. Damien felt the surge through his hands, hot but not burning, powerful but controlled. Under his direction, the gathered energy shot upward through the temple spire in a concentrated beam of blinding blue-white light. It struck the command ship precisely where Damien had targeted, the central node of the ley line collectors. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the enemy. The corrupted collectors, designed to drain energy slowly, couldn't handle the massive influx. They overloaded, sending feedback cascading through the ship's systems. Secondary explosions rippled across its hull as power conduits ruptured. But the attack was not without cost. Damien felt the strain of channeling such power, his muscles spasming and vision blurring. Only Halai's steady presence across the crystal kept him anchored as energy continued to flow through him. Hold fast, her voice echoed in his mind. Their systems are failing. Outside, the destroyer command ship listed heavily to one side, its weapons falling silent. The smaller vessels, suddenly without coordination, fell into disarray. Some attempted to continue the attack, while others began to retreat. Sensing opportunity, Damien redirected the energy flow, splitting it into multiple smaller beams that struck the remaining enemy ships. Not enough to destroy them outright, but sufficient to disable their weapons and drive them back. When the last beam faded, Damien stumbled away from the crystal column, exhausted beyond anything he had experienced before. Halai caught him before he could fall, her touch gentle but strong. You did well, warrior, she said. Her own light dimmed from the exertion. The immediate threat is neutralized, but this is only the beginning. Morthus will send more ships, more followers. Damien nodded weakly. Then we need to prepare, strengthen defenses, coordinate with surviving Atheran forces. His military mind was already analyzing next steps, despite his exhaustion. Yes, Halai agreed. But first, you must rest. Even with your unique heritage, channeling ley line energy takes a tremendous toll on a physical body. She guided him to a small alcove where crystal formations created a natural resting place. As Damien sank down, his limbs heavy with fatigue, Halai placed her hand on his forehead. Sleep now, she whispered. When you wake, we will begin in earnest. Darkness claimed him immediately, but it was not the emptiness of normal sleep. In his dreams, Damien saw visions of Athera as it had been millennia ago, a world of harmonious balance between technology and nature, where beings like Halai walked openly among the people, guiding and protecting. He saw the first corruption of the ley lines, the slow poisoning of sacred sites. and Halai's decision to enter deep slumber to preserve her essence until a time when she might be needed again. And woven through these visions, he caught glimpses of his own ancestry, a human woman from Earth's distant past, standing hand in hand with a being of light, their union creating a bloodline that would eventually lead to him. When Damien awoke, he found the temple transformed. Atheran survivors had gathered in the central chamber, their numbers far greater than he expected. Among them, he recognized Ketra, now bandaged but standing tall, as she coordinated defense teams. High Priest Valan and Commander Thane had also arrived, their expressions solemn as they conferred with Halai near the central pedestal. Damien approached cautiously, still feeling the residual effects of channeling so much energy. His body ached, as though he had fought a physical battle for days without rest. Halai noticed him first, her luminous gaze softening. "The warrior awakens," she announced, bringing conversations to a halt as all eyes turned toward Damien. Valan stepped forward, bowing deeply, first to Halai, then, to Damien's surprise, to him. "The human who returned our goddess to us," the high priest said, genuine respect in his voice where before there had been only tolerance. "We owe you a debt that cannot be repaid." Commander Thane nodded in agreement. "Your actions saved not only the temple but hundreds of lives. The destroyer fleet retreated beyond our system's edge after their command ship fell." "They'll be back," Damien said, uncomfortable with the attention. "And in greater numbers. Morthus won't abandon his crusade because of one defeat." "Precisely why we must prepare," Halai interjected. "The temporary victory has bought us time we must use wisely." She gestured toward the three-dimensional map of ley lines, now projected above the central pedestal for all to see. "The corruption has spread further than I feared during my slumber. Nearly 1/3 of the major ley lines have been tainted by destroyer technology, their energy siphoned to fuel weapons and corrupt more lines." Ketra joined them, nodding respectfully to Damien. "We've received reports from across Athera. Smaller temples are falling daily. The destroyers have adapted their strategy. Instead of direct attacks, they're placing corruption devices at ley line nodes, then withdrawing before our forces can respond." "They're playing the long game," Damien observed. "Death by 1,000 cuts rather than a single blow." Halai confirmed his assessment with a grave nod. "If the corruption reaches the primary convergence points, all of Athera will fall under shadow. The ley lines will wither, and with them, all life on this world." "Then we stop them at the convergence points," Damien said, studying the map. "Fortify the remaining major temples. Create a defensive perimeter around each node." Commander Thane shook his head. "We lack the numbers. Our forces are already stretched thin, protecting civilian populations." "Then we take the fight to them," Damien countered. "Find their bases. Destroy their corruption devices at the source." "That would require locating their hidden facilities," Valan said. "Our scouts have tried and failed. The destroyers shield their bases with technology that blocks ley line sensing." Damien turned to Halai. "When we connected through the crystal column, I could see patterns in the corruption, traces leading back to their sources. If we could establish that connection again—" "It would be dangerous," Halai warned. "The strain nearly overwhelmed you after only minutes. A prolonged connection could prove fatal to a physical being, even one with your heritage." "Do we have a choice?" Damien asked quietly. The goddess studied him, her ageless eyes seeing deeper than his words. "No," she finally admitted. "We do not." Over the following days, as destroyer scouting parties probed the temple's newly established defenses, Damien and Halai worked to strengthen their connection. Each session left him more drained than the last, but also more attuned to the ley line network. Gradually, he learned to channel smaller amounts of energy for longer periods without collapsing from exhaustion. During these sessions, they discovered that Damien's military experience provided an unexpected advantage. where Halai could sense the ley lines as extensions of herself. Damien perceived them as tactical assets, identifying choke points, defensive positions, and vulnerabilities that had eluded even the goddess's ancient wisdom. Between training sessions, Damien worked with Commander Thane to reorganize the temple's defenses. Human refugees from Earth, previously relegated to menial tasks, were integrated into combat units, their experience with physical warfare complementing the Aetherans' energy-based fighting techniques. Ketra, now fully recovered, became Damien's liaison to the Aetheran pilots, coordinating aerial reconnaissance and evacuation protocols for outlying settlements. Their professional relationship gradually warmed as mutual respect overcame cultural differences. Through it all, Damien found himself increasingly drawn to Halai. The goddess was unlike any being he had encountered, powerful beyond comprehension, yet vulnerable in her reawakening to a changed world. She carried the weight of her people's survival with quiet dignity, never showing doubt despite the overwhelming odds they faced. Late one evening, as they stood on a high balcony overlooking the crystal plains, Damien finally asked the question that had been building since their first connection. Why me? There must have been others with the same heritage over the centuries. Halai's gaze remained on the distant horizon, where the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. There were, she acknowledged, but heritage alone is not enough. The ley lines respond to more than blood. They respond to spirit, to purpose. She turned to him, her luminous eyes reflecting the starlight. You carry wounds, Damien, not just physical scars, but deeper hurts. You have seen war consume your homeworld, witnessed betrayal and loss, yet you have not surrendered to despair or hatred. You fight not from bloodlust, but from the need to protect. Halai stepped closer, her presence warming the cool night air. The ley lines recognize this balance in you, the warrior's strength tempered by compassion. It is rare in any species, but especially precious in these dark times. Damien absorbed her words, uncomfortable with the weight of expectation they carried. I'm just a soldier who survived when others didn't. There's no special purpose in that. Isn't there? Halai asked softly. The universe seldom deals in coincidences. Damien of Earth, your arrival on Aethera, your assignment to the temple, your hand being the one to return my essence, these threads were woven long before either of us recognized the pattern. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his cheek. The touch sent a ripple of energy through him, not the overwhelming surge of their training sessions, but something gentler, more intimate. Rest tonight, she said, withdrawing her hand. Tomorrow we begin the true hunt for Morthus and his corruption devices. Damien watched her glide back into the temple, her form luminous against the darkened corridors. He remained on the balcony long after she had gone, his thoughts more turbulent than he cared to admit. Morning brought renewed purpose as Aetheran scouts reported increased destroyer activity near several major ley line convergence points. The enemy was growing bolder, perhaps sensing that time favored their strategy of gradual corruption. In the central chamber, Damien and Halai prepared for their most ambitious connection yet. Rather than the small crystal column they had used for training, they would channel through the main pedestal, the heart of the temple's power. Aetheran priests established a protective circle around them, ready to intervene if the energy flow became unstable. Commander Thane and his officers stood ready to deploy forces based on whatever intelligence Damien and Halai might uncover. Remember, Halai cautioned, as they took their positions at the pedestal. We seek only to observe. Do not engage with the corrupted lines directly. They may carry Morthus's consciousness back to us. Damien nodded, centering himself as they had practiced. Focus on tracking the corruption to its source. No direct confrontation. As their hands met across the crystal surface, the now familiar surge of energy flowed between them. Damien's consciousness expanded outward, following the ley lines that radiated from the temple. Halai's presence moved alongside his, guiding and supporting as they traversed the vast network. Together, they traced healthy ley lines to points where corruption began, following the dark tendrils back toward their origins. Each corrupted node led to others, creating a complex web of tainted energy that stretched across Aethera like a cancer. There, Damien's thoughts communicated to Halai, focusing on a particularly dense nexus of corruption. That pattern is different, more organized, more deliberate. Halai's consciousness moved closer to the area he indicated. Yes, this is no random corruption. This is a directed attack, a spearhead aimed at the heart of the northern continent. They followed the corruption deeper, moving cautiously to avoid detection. As they approached its source, the ley lines grew increasingly distorted, their natural blue luminescence twisted into sickly greens and purples. This is worse than I feared. Halai's thoughts carried shock and sorrow. They're not just draining the lines, they're transforming them, changing their fundamental nature. Damien focused on tactical assessment, scanning the corrupted region for vulnerabilities. There's a pattern to the transformation, concentric circles expanding outward from a central point. If we can locate that point. His thoughts cut short as they encountered a barrier, not physical, but a wall of chaotic energy that blocked their further exploration. Morthus, Halai identified immediately. He's shielding the central corruption device. Despite their caution, their presence had been detected. The barrier pulsed, sending probing tendrils of corrupted energy toward them. We need to withdraw, Halai urged. Now, before... The warning came too late. A surge of corrupted power slammed into their joined consciousness, attempting to follow their connection back to the temple. Damien felt Halai's panic as the corruption threatened to overwhelm them both. Acting on instinct, Damien severed their connection to the tainted ley lines, creating a mental firewall between the corruption and their retreat path. The effort was excruciating, like cutting off a limb, but it provided the moments they needed to withdraw. Their consciousnesses snapped back to the temple with brutal force. Damien was thrown physically backward, breaking contact with the pedestal. He collapsed to the floor, every nerve ending burning with pain. Through blurred vision, he saw Halai similarly affected, her luminous form flickering unstably. The priests rushed forward, supporting the goddess as Commander Thane and Ketra helped Damien to his feet. "What happened?" Thane demanded. "The pedestal nearly overloaded." Damien struggled to find words, his mind still reeling from the abrupt disconnection. Morthus, he's created a central hub for the corruption, northern continent, but he detected us, tried to follow our connection back here. Halai had recovered enough to speak, though her voice wavered. Damien protected us both. Without his intervention, the corruption would have reached the temple through our link. She approached him, concern evident in her luminous eyes. You severed the connection by channeling the backlash through yourself. The cost could have been your life. Damien managed a weak smile. Military training. Protect the command structure at all costs. Halai's expression suggested she found nothing amusing in his self-sacrifice, but she turned to address the gathered Aetherans. We have located Morthus's primary corruption device. It lies beneath the Mountains of Whispers on the northern continent. From there, he directs the transformation of the ley lines. Commander Thane studied the main map, where a new indicator marked the location they had discovered. That region is heavily fortified. The mountains themselves are riddled with crystal caverns that would make conventional assault impossible. Then we don't use conventional methods, Damien said, his strength gradually returning. We use the ley lines themselves. All eyes turned to him, including Halai's, with expressions ranging from confusion to interest. Explain, the goddess prompted. Damien pointed to the map. Morthus is using the ley lines against us, corrupting them to spread his influence. But the lines themselves are neutral. They respond to the strongest will directing them. He looked to Halai for confirmation. She nodded slowly. In essence, yes. The ley lines are conduits of raw energy and information. Their current corruption is not irreversible, merely a redirection of their natural flow. Then we redirect them back, Damien continued. Not by fighting the corruption directly, but by establishing a stronger flow pattern that overrides it. He traced a pattern on the map, encircling Morthus's base. If we can activate these dormant ley lines simultaneously, create a surge of clean energy that approaches from multiple directions, it could purge the corruption and isolate Morthus's base. Halai finished, excitement building in her voice. But such a surge would require coordinated activation from at least 5 major temples, channeling power simultaneously. Valon stepped forward, studying the map carefully. 3 of those temples are still under our control. The other 2 have fallen to the destroyers. Then we retake them, Damien said simply. Surgical strikes, small teams. Get in, secure the temple cores, establish connections to the ley line network. Commander Thane stroked his chin thoughtfully. Risky, but possible with the right personnel. He glanced at Damien. I assume you intend to lead one of these teams? The Eastern Temple, Damien confirmed. It's closest to the corruption hub. When the surge begins, that position will face the strongest backlash. Halai's expression darkened. You would place yourself at the point of greatest danger? After barely surviving our last connection. I'm the only one with experience channeling ley line energy who isn't a goddess, Damien pointed out. And you'll be needed here, at the central hub, coordinating the overall surge. The goddess looked as though she wanted to object further, but pragmatism won out. Very well, but you will take Ketra and our strongest remaining warriors, and you will exercise extreme caution. The next days passed in a blur of preparation. Teams were assembled for each target temple, equipment modified to protect against corrupted energy, and communication protocols established that would work even if the ley lines became temporarily unstable. Damien spent hours with Halai, refining his ability to channel energy safely and learning to recognize the signatures of corruption before they could take hold. Their work together created a bond that transcended mere alliance, a connection of minds and purposes that neither spoke of directly, but both increasingly relied upon. The night before the mission, Damien stood again on the high balcony, watching distant lightning play across the crystal plains. The weather had grown more volatile as the corruption spread, the planet's natural systems responding to the disturbance in the ley lines. You should be resting. Halai's voice came from behind him. Damien didn't turn. So should you. The goddess moved to stand beside him. Her glow softened to a gentle luminescence that complemented the night, rather than dispelling it. Gods do not require rest as mortals do, she said, though the slight dimming of her light suggested otherwise. Half-truths don't become you, Damien replied with a small smile. Halai sighed. A surprisingly human gesture from a divine being. 3,000 years of slumber, and still, I find myself weary. Perhaps godhood is not what the legends claim. They stood in comfortable silence for a time, watching the storm move across the landscape. When Halai spoke again, her voice was softer, more vulnerable than he had heard before. I fear for you, Damien of Earth. The Eastern Temple sits at the edge of the corruption. The backlash when we initiate the surge will be substantial. Damien turned to her then. I know the risks. They're acceptable given the stakes. Acceptable? Halai's eyes flashed with sudden intensity. You speak of your life as though it were a tactical resource to be expended. It is not. Isn't it? Damien countered. In war, every life becomes a resource. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater objective. And who decides which sacrifices are necessary? The goddess's voice held an edge of anger now. Who determines the value of one life against another? Damien met her gaze steadily. Those who are willing to give everything have earned the right to make that choice for themselves. The anger in Halai's eyes softened to something more complex, sorrow mingled with admiration. 3,000 years ago, I made a similar choice. I entered the long sleep believing it was the only way to preserve what remained of my power for a future time of need. She looked out at the storm-racked landscape. I abandoned my people to centuries of slow decline, telling myself it was necessary, that my sacrifice served a greater purpose. Now I wonder if I merely feared to face our failure, to watch as everything we had built crumbled despite our best efforts. Damien reached out hesitantly, then placed his hand over hers, where it rested on the balcony rail. The contact sent a subtle current of energy between them, but he didn't pull away. "You're here now," he said simply. "That's what matters." Halai looked down at their joined hands, then back to his face. "As are you, Damien of Earth, against all probability, across the void between stars. You came to Athera, to this temple, to me." The weight of unspoken feeling hung between them, neither willing to give it voice on the eve of such peril. Instead, Halai gently squeezed his hand before releasing it. "Come," she said. "There is something I must show you before tomorrow's mission." She led him deeper into the temple than he had yet ventured, down crystalline stairs that spiraled into the planet's crust. The ley lines grew denser here, converging from all directions into what Damien recognized as the true heart of the temple. They emerged into a spherical chamber where reality itself seemed thinned. The boundaries between physical space and energy blurred, ley lines visible not as embedded channels, but as free-flowing rivers of light that moved through the air itself. At the center floated a crystal unlike any Damien had seen. Not the clear or blue varieties common throughout Athera, but a perfect sphere of absolute blackness that somehow radiated light. "The Void Heart," Halai said reverently. "The first crystal formed when Athera cooled from its molten state. All ley lines originate from this single point." Damien felt the power emanating from the sphere, not threatening, but awesome in the original sense of the word, inspiring both wonder and fear. "Why show me this now?" he asked, his voice hushed in the presence of something so ancient. "Because you must understand what we fight for," Halai replied. "Not just for Athera's people or its temples, but for the living heart of a world." She gestured toward the Void Heart. "If Morthus corrupts this, all is truly lost, not just for Athera, but potentially for worlds beyond. The ley lines extend further than even I fully comprehend." Damien approached the floating sphere cautiously. "It's beautiful," he admitted, "in a terrifying sort of way." "Like many worthwhile things in this universe," Halai said, watching him closely. "The Void Heart responds to intent and will. Touch it, if you wish. It will not harm one who approaches with respect." After a moment's hesitation, Damien reached out. His fingers brushed the surface of the black crystal, and immediately his consciousness expanded far beyond even what he had experienced in their shared connections. For a breathtaking moment, he perceived not just Athera's ley line network, but tendrils that extended into space, connecting to other worlds, other systems, a vast cosmic web of energy and information that bound the galaxy together. When he withdrew his hand, Damien found himself changed. The perception faded, but the knowledge remained, an understanding of connection that transcended planetary boundaries. "You see now," Halai said, "not a question but a recognition." Damien nodded, still processing the experience. "Morthus can't be allowed to touch this, no matter the cost." "No matter the cost," Halai echoed, though her eyes suggested she still questioned what price she was willing to pay. Dawn brought final preparations for the mission. 5 teams assembled in the central chamber, receiving last instructions from Commander Thane and spiritual blessings from High Priest Valon. Damien's team consisted of Ketra and 6 Atheran warriors, all veterans of previous encounters with the destroyers. Halai moved among the groups, offering words of encouragement and small enhancements to their equipment, infusing shields with additional protective energy, ensuring communications devices would function even through corrupted ley lines. When she reached Damien, she placed both hands on his shoulders, her touch transferring a warm current of power that settled beneath his skin like armor. "This will provide some protection against the corruption," she explained. "Not enough to make you invulnerable, but perhaps enough to make a difference." "Thank you," Damien said, feeling the energy integrate with his own life force. Halai held his gaze for a long moment. "Return to us, warrior of Earth. Your journey here is not yet complete." The goddess moved to the central pedestal as the teams departed for their assigned transport vessels. From there, she would coordinate the overall operation, maintaining contact through the ley lines and preparing for the massive energy surge once all teams were in position. Damien's ship, piloted by Ketra, took a circuitous route to avoid destroyer patrols. The Eastern Temple, once a magnificent structure rivaling the main complex, now stood partially ruined, its crystal spires cracked and darkened by corruption. "Sensors show minimal destroyer presence," Ketra reported as they approached. "Either they've moved on after securing the temple, or it's a trap," Damien finished. "We proceed as planned, but with extra caution. The temple core is our primary objective." They landed in a sheltered ravine half a mile from the temple, concealing the ship with local crystal formations. The approach on foot allowed Damien to assess the corruption firsthand. It manifested visibly here, once clear crystals, now veined with sickly purple. Native vegetation withered and twisted into unnatural forms. Using hand signals, Damien directed the team through the corrupted landscape. They encountered no resistance until reaching the temple perimeter, where automated defense systems activated, corrupted ley line energy forming barriers and firing erratic bolts at intruders. "These aren't sophisticated," Damien observed after studying the pattern of attacks. "Set to target any movement, but not adaptive." Ketra nodded. "Automated defenses, not active occupation. The destroyers must have moved on after securing the temple. Which means the core may be relatively unguarded," Damien concluded. "Ketra, take 3 warriors and create a diversion at the western entrance. The rest come with me through the maintenance access." The plan worked better than expected. As Ketra's group engaged the automated defenses at the main entrance, Damien led his smaller team through a service tunnel that a Theran temple designs, standardized across all major structures. Inside, the corruption was more pronounced. Ley lines that should have glowed blue now pulsed with sickly, purple light, and the air itself felt heavy, charged with wrongness. They encountered only 2 destroyer cultists, left behind to monitor the corruption process. The Atheran warriors dispatched them quickly, but not before one activated an alarm that echoed through the temple's corrupted ley lines. "Our window just got smaller," Damien warned. "The core chamber should be directly below us." They descended through increasingly corrupted sections of the temple. The Atheran warriors showed visible discomfort as the tainted energy pressed against them. But Halai's protection allowed Damien to forge ahead with less difficulty. The core chamber, when they finally reached it, presented a disturbing sight. The temple's heart, a crystal formation similar to but smaller than the Void Heart, was encased in a mechanical device that pulsed with corrupted energy. Tendrils of the corruption spread outward along the ley lines, pumping tainted power through the network. "Maintain a perimeter," Damien ordered the warriors. "I need to disable this device and establish a clean connection." While the Atherans guarded the entrances, Damien examined the corruption mechanism. It was sophisticated, but recognizable. Technology merged with corrupted ley line energy to create a self-sustaining system that gradually transformed the natural flow. "Ketra, what's your status?" he called over the communication device. "Perimeter secured temporarily," her voice replied, strained with effort. "But sensors show destroyer ships approaching. Estimated arrival, 15 minutes. Understood. Damien focused on the corruption device, looking for vulnerabilities. Direct removal might trigger a catastrophic release of tainted energy. Instead, he needed to subvert it, prepare the core for the coming surge. Drawing on his training with Halai, Damien placed his hands on sections of the core crystal that remained uncorrupted. He felt for the natural flow beneath the taint, the original pattern that had existed for millennia before Morthus's interference. There, a flicker of true energy, suppressed but not eliminated. Damien channeled his own energy into that spark, carefully avoiding contact with the corruption. It was delicate work, like separating strands of a complex weave without disturbing the overall pattern. Gradually, a small channel of clean energy formed, bypassing the corruption device without triggering its defenses. Through this tenuous connection, Damien reached out to the leyline network. "Halai," he called silently. "Eastern Temple secured. Core compromised but accessible." The goddess's presence answered immediately, flowing through the clean channel he had established. "Well done, warrior. The other teams report similar progress. We prepare for synchronization in 10 minutes. The destroyers have detected us," Damien warned. "Reinforcements incoming." "Then we accelerate our timeline," Halai decided. "Prepare your team. The surge begins in 5 minutes." Damien relayed the update to his team. "Positions everyone. When the surge hits, the corruption will fight back. Be ready for anything." The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Outside the temple, destroyer ships would be landing, deploying cultists to reclaim their corrupted prize. Inside, Damien and his team waited at the fulcrum point of a planetary gambit. Through his connection to the ley lines, Damien felt the other teams establish their positions. One by one, 4 points of clean energy joined with the main temple, forming a pentagram pattern across Aethera's surface. At the center of this configuration, Halai gathered power from the Void Heart itself, preparing to channel it through all 5 temples simultaneously. "Now," came Halai's command. The surge began as a whisper in the ley lines, a subtle shift in the energy flow. Then it built rapidly, clean power flooding through the network in a coordinated wave. As it reached Damien's position, he directed it through the channel he had created, bypassing the corruption device's defenses. The chamber filled with blinding light as corrupted and clean energy collided. The destroyer device screamed, an unnatural sound of metal and crystal under impossible stress. Corruption fought back, sending tendrils of tainted power against the surge, seeking weaknesses. Damien became the focal point, standing firm at the nexus of conflict. Halai's protection burned bright around him, but the corruption found gaps, sending lances of pain through his body as it sought purchase. Through gritted teeth, Damien maintained his stance, channeling ever more power through the clean connection. The temple shuddered as the battle of energies intensified. Warning shouts from his team indicated destroyer cultists had breached the upper levels, fighting their way down toward the core. "Hold the line," Halai's voice urged in his mind. "The corruption is weakening across the network." Damien could feel it, the tide turning as clean energy reclaimed corrupted ley lines. The destroyer device sparked and smoked, its hold on the temple core failing. But the backlash grew stronger as the corruption concentrated its resistance at the 5 focus points. At Damien's position, nearest to Morthus's central hub, the backlash manifested as a physical wave of corrupted energy that slammed into him with devastating force. His protection flared and shattered, leaving him vulnerable as tainted power tore through his defenses. The pain was beyond description, every cell in his body screaming as corruption sought to transform him from within. Through the haze of agony, Damien heard his team calling his name, felt Ketra trying to pull him back from the core. But retreat meant failure. With the last of his strength, Damien pushed forward instead of back, pressing both hands directly against the temple core. Clean energy surged through him in response, meeting corruption in direct confrontation. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Damien became the battleground, corruption and purity fighting for dominance within his flesh. His consciousness began to fragment, awareness scattering across the ley line network. Through this fractured perception, he witnessed the other focus points, teams of Aetherans channeling the surge, facing their own backlash, but none as severe as his. He saw Morthus's central hub beneath the Mountains of Whispers, the massive corruption device there beginning to fail as clean energy surrounded and isolated it. And he saw Halai at the main temple, her divine form stretched to its limits as she coordinated the entire operation. When she sensed his consciousness fragmenting, her focus shifted instantly. "Damien!" Her voice cut through the chaos. "Hold to yourself! Do not let go!" But the pull of dissolution was too strong. Damien felt himself unraveling, body and mind separating as corruption and cleansing energy tore him apart at the fundamental level. "I can't," his thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. "You can," Halai insisted, "and you must." Through their connection, she sent not just energy, but memory, images of Earth, of battles Damien had survived, of the first moment he had held the crystal fragment that contained her essence. She reminded him of his physical form, his identity, the unique pattern that made him Damien of Earth. Slowly, painfully, he pulled himself back from the brink of dissolution. The corruption device failed completely, exploding in a shower of tainted crystal and metal. Clean energy flooded the temple core, purging the last of the corruption and restoring the natural flow of the ley lines. Damien collapsed as the surge subsided, his body barely recognizable as human. Corruption had left its mark, patches of skin crystallized, veins glowing with residual energy, eyes transformed into pools of light similar to Halai's own. Ketra reached him first, cradling his broken form. "Hold on," she urged, activating emergency medical protocols on her equipment. "We're getting you back to the main temple." Through the now purified ley lines, Damien felt rather than heard Halai's response, a wave of relief, determination, and something deeper that neither had yet named. The journey back to the main temple passed in a blur of pain and fractured consciousness. Damien drifted between awareness and oblivion, his transformed body struggling to integrate the changes forced upon it by corruption and cleansing. He awoke fully in a healing chamber, suspended in a pool of energized crystal fluid. Halai sat beside the pool, her luminous hand resting on the surface, directing healing energy into his damaged form. "Welcome back," she said softly, when his eyes opened. "You have been unconscious for 3 days." Damien tried to speak, found he could not, and instead formed the thought. "The mission." Halai smiled. "Successful beyond our hopes. The surge purified 80% of the corrupted ley lines across Athara. Morthus's central hub was isolated and subsequently destroyed by a combined Aetheran force. Casualties? The soldier in him needed to know the cost. "Minimal," Halai assured him. "Your team suffered the worst of the backlash, yet all survived. The corruption in your system was extensive. It required significant intervention." Damien became aware of the changes in his body. The crystallization had receded, but not vanished entirely. His left arm remained partially transformed. Translucent crystal, merged with flesh in a strangely beautiful pattern. When he focused, he could still sense the ley lines, though the connection was muted compared to what he had experienced during the surge. "Am I still human?" The question formed unbidden in his mind. Halai's expression softened. "You are yourself, Damien of Earth. Changed, certainly. The corruption and the cleansing have left their mark, but your essence remains." She helped him sit up, the crystal fluid draining away as he rose. Damien found he could stand, though his balance felt different, as though his center of gravity had shifted to accommodate new densities within his transformed body. The changes appear to have stabilized, Halai continued, watching him carefully. You now exist partially in the energy state of the ley lines, similar in some ways to my own nature. It grants certain abilities, but also responsibilities. I can still feel them, Damien said, his voice returning, though it carried a subtle resonance it hadn't before. The ley lines, not as strongly as during our connections, but they're there, like music just at the edge of hearing. Halai nodded. That connection will remain. You have become something unprecedented, neither fully human, nor Etheran, nor divine, but a bridge between all three. Over the following weeks, as Ethera began its long recovery from the corruption, Damien learned to navigate his new existence. The partial crystallization of his body provided enhanced strength and resilience, while his permanent connection to the ley lines allowed him to sense energy patterns throughout the temple and beyond. High Priest Valan, once so dismissive of humans, now sought Damien's counsel regularly, treating him with a reverence that made Damien deeply uncomfortable. Commander Thane was more practical, focusing on Damien's tactical abilities rather than his transformation, which provided a welcome sense of normalcy. Ketra, perhaps understanding his need for ordinary connection, maintained their growing friendship without treating him differently. She included him in regular activities with other pilots and warriors, ensuring he wasn't isolated by his unique status. But it was Halai who truly understood what Damien experienced. The goddess spent hours with him, teaching him to control his new abilities, to channel ley line energy safely, to exist comfortably in his transformed state. Their work together deepened the bond that had formed during the battle against corruption. One evening, as they walked together through the crystal gardens that surrounded the restored temple, Halai broached a subject that had remained unspoken between them. The Etheran Council has proposed a mission, she began, her tone carefully neutral. With the ley lines purified, they wish to extend our understanding of the network beyond Ethera itself, the connections to other worlds that you glimpsed through the Void Heart. They believe these might be navigable. Damien glanced at her, understanding immediately. They want to send an expedition. Yes, a ship equipped with ley line navigation systems, capable of following the energy pathways between stars. Halai paused beside a particularly beautiful crystal formation that captured the setting sunlight. They have asked me to lead this mission. Of course they have, Damien said with a small smile. Who better to represent Ethera to other worlds than its goddess? Halai turned to face him fully. I would not go alone. Your connection to the ley lines, your experience with other worlds, these would be invaluable. The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with all they had shared and all that remained unexplored. A goddess and a half-crystallized human, Damien mused. That should make for interesting first contact. Is that a yes? Halai asked, a rare uncertainty in her luminous eyes. Damien considered the path that had brought him to this moment, from refugee soldier to temple guard to something beyond ordinary humanity. There was nothing for him on Earth now, and while he had found a place among the Etherans, the pull of discovery was strong. But stronger still was the pull toward the being before him, divine yet vulnerable, powerful yet compassionate, ancient yet learning to see the universe anew through their shared experiences. Yes, he said simply, wherever the ley lines lead. Halai's radiance brightened with joy, illuminating the garden around them. She extended her hand, and when Damien took it, their energies merged seamlessly, no longer goddess and mortal, but partners balanced in power and purpose. Then let us see what wonders await, she said, as the twin suns of Ethera set on one chapter and promised the dawn of another. 3 months later, as the expedition ship lifted from the temple landing pad, Damien stood beside Halai on the observation deck. Below, Atheran citizens gathered to witness their departure, among them Ketra, Valon, and Commander Thine, friends and allies who had become something like family. The ship rose higher, breaking free of atmosphere, revealing Athera in its entirety, a world of crystal beauty. Its ley line network, now visible from space, as a web of blue luminescence that pulsed with healthy energy. "It's strange," Damien said, his partially crystallized hand resting on the viewport. "When I first arrived here, I was just another refugee, lost, without purpose. Now I'm leaving by choice, with a mission." "Not just a mission," Halai corrected gently. "A journey, one we undertake together." As the ship engaged its ley line navigation systems, preparing to follow the ancient energy paths between stars, Damien felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the pain and transformation that had brought him to this moment. Beside him, Halai glowed with anticipation, her divine form resonating with the same energy that now flowed partially through his veins. They were neither wholly separate nor completely merged, but connected in a balance that honored both their natures. The stars beckoned, and somewhere among them, other worlds waited, some perhaps with ley lines of their own, others with mysteries yet unimagined. And whatever they might find, they would face it as they had faced the corruption, together, stronger for their differences, united in purpose. The ship surged forward, following a path of light only they could see, carrying a goddess and her warrior into the waiting cosmos.